After these 3 long stitches are knit, the same 2 locking stitches are knit as a spacer, and then 3 long stitches are knit into the next hole. 1, 2, 3. Then continue with the 2 locking pins as spaces. But for this big hole, we need to knit 5 long stitches, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. After the 5 long knits, continue with 2 locking pins. Then knit 4 long stitches in the last hole of the previous row. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then the second row is done. Let's start the third row. Third row, we'll start with a lock stitch. Then turn the piece over, directly in the second stitch. Look at this, it's the first one. Knit a pull-out stitch in the second stitch. Then in the third stitch, knit a pull-out stitch as well. The purpose of these 2 pins is to extradite, that is to extradite our entry position here. Turn it over, and let's take a look at the original position. And the second row is actually extradited into the long stitch, which is the third to last stitch. Then we'll knit 3 locking stitches to represent 1 long stitch. Hang a marker button on the third lock stitch, and continue with another long stitch in the same place. This creates a plus needle. Knit an extra long stitch on an adjacent stitch. That is 2 long stitches in the same place. Once these 2 long stitches are knit, let's see, there's a lock stitch in the top row, 2 lock stitches spaced apart, and 2 lock stitches spaced apart here as well. Then on the first stitch, knit a long stitch with extra stitches. For the next few stitches, we're going to knit an extra long stitch in each of these stitches. Proceed with, and the last one, also a plus pin. That is, in the last row, we knit 5 long stitches through a big hole. And in this row, we knit an extra stitch in each of the previous rows. So that makes 10 long stitches here. 2 locking pins in addition to these 5 extra pins. By the time you get to the center of these 3 long stitches, we'll enter the needle in the center stitch, and we'll knit 3 long stitches in this stitch. 1, 2, 3. After the 3 long stitches, there are also 2 locking stitches for spacing. Then to the next. A group of 3 long needles in this place. We also knit long plus stitches in each stitch pattern. That is, 2 long stitches in the same place. After these 3 sets of long plus stitches have been knit, 2 locking stitches are also knit as intervals. And then on the last couple of stitches, we're going to go over 1 stitch. And hook on top of the next stitch and knit 2 long stitches in this stitch. That's the extra long stitches. and on the second to last stitch, which is the first to last, we'll knit 2 long stitches on the second to last stitch. And that's the end of the row. And then we're done. When we're done with that row, we'll start on the next row. Start by knitting a lock stitch, flip it over, extraction, then continue to draw so that this stitch is extradited from the starting point to this stitch. Then 3 locking pins. When we're done with this row, we'll just flip the tabs after turning the piece over. Leave the first stitch empty and put it in the second stitch. Look at this. It's like this. This line is in the front. Let's go right through it. This line of the needle's eye is brought out. Crochet a lead stitch. Go on. Extraction. This is the fairy line. Let's put the line. That's where the stitches lead to. And then you start crocheting this row. 3 locking pins. These 3 locking pins can be tagged with a marker clasp. This place is useless. You can just take it off. These 3 locking pins represent 1 long pin. We'll knit another long stitch in the same position. Then on the next stitch, also knit 2 long stitches. It's just a long stitch with extra stitches. When you're done, this is the place where you knit 2 locking stitches in the last row and continue with 2 locking stitches as a spacer. Then start weaving. The first needle in this place is a long needle. Also start with a long stitch plus then for the next stitch, we'll just knit 1 long stitch. Repeat. Long needles plus needles. A long needle. Long needles plus needles. A long needle. This place is finished. It's also 2 pins spaced apart, which means that in the last row, there were 2 pins here and 2 pins here. And then to this place, 3 long stitches. This place is in the same gauge. The last row was knit in the same gauge. So this row, the knitting method remains the same. We're still in the middle of the gauge. Knit 3 long stitches in this position. In fact, this place is the same as saying that we split the wings into 2 parts. 1 part of the large wings and 1 part of the small wings. Then there are also 2 locking stitches. At this place, there are 5 sets of extra stitches in the last row, long stitches and extra stitches, and this set of stitches is the same as here. Let's knit first. Long needles plus needles. Next, knit a long stitch. Repeatable. Long needles plus needles. A long needle like this law. Repeat the weave to take this place. This group. This place is finished. And after the centerpiece is done, 2 locking pins for spacing. Look at this place is for spacing. This place is for 2 locking stitches. We're doing 2 locking stitches. This place is the same every turn. Then, when we get to this place, we knit a long stitch inside the first long stitch. The second one is the same long stitch. This one, don't worry about it. Just take it off. This row is finished. Then the first 4 rows are finished. From the 5th row onwards, our knitting method is roughly the same as that of the next one. Let's pay attention to it. First of all, look at the place where this needle starts and then we'll start knitting. We'll start by flipping the fabric. Leave the first stitch empty and go straight into the second stitch. Wrap the thread around and bring out the hook for a pull stitch, a second, a third, and that's the third stitch, which is also a pull stitch. It means that we extradite the position of the needle into this position. 3 locking pins. This place can be marked with or without a marker. So if we're new to this, we'll try to mark it with a marker, so it's easy to use as a reference, and the same goes for all of us. Knit another long stitch in the same position in this next stitch. Also a long needle and a needle. I've already said it here. The method of crocheting in this position is unchanged. 2 locking pins as spacers, and then this place, that's the last lap. This is the place with the most stitches. So we're going to knit this round first, and then we're going to knit a long extra stitch in the first stitch. For the rest of the stitches, except for the last one, knit long stitches with no increases or decreases in the middle. Finish weaving these areas according to this pattern. I'm not going to repeat myself. It's just long stitches, one after the other, except for the last one. Then remember to check the number of stitches here. That is, except for this first stitch, which is an extra long stitch. These 13 stitches in the center do not add or subtract from the long stitch. That's the last stitch. Also hook a long stitch without adding or subtracting. The first and last stitches of these 2 stitches are all long plus stitches, and the middle part is all long without adding or subtracting. Then we'll hook 2 locking stitches, and we'll knit 3 long stitches in this position, in the middle of the row. Crochet 3 long stitches in the same stitch. 2 locking pins as spacers. It's the same weave over here. This place has the same pattern as this place over here. That is to say, the long stitches inside the first mother stitch are added, and the middle is a long stitch that doesn't add or subtract, so that it's crocheted one after the other. On the last stitch, we crochet the extra stitch of the long stitch. In the center are long stitches that don't add or subtract. I'm not going to repeat myself. When you check your stitches here, we've got 7 long stitches in the center, plus and minus, plus stitches on either side, and that's all we've got. We're still 2 locking pins apart. And then to the last place. It's also knit with 2 long stitches and a needle. Then the marking clasp is useless. Take it off. The 5th row is ready. We'll start the 6th row. The 6th row is basically the same as the 5th row. We just need to knit long stitches on the first and last stitches of these 2 parts. And in the middle of the row, we'll knit without adding or subtracting anything. Look at the details. First, flip the tabs. Remember that when we flip the weave piece, we have the same weave pattern. Skipping the first stitch on the second stitch to induce a pulling extradition. Hook another one and keep pulling. Put this on the draw. If you count from here, it's the 3rd to last stitch. Here under. That's the 3rd stitch. Then 3 locking stitches. Newbies, remember to mark the top of the 3rd button. Then hook a long stitch. Two locking stitches as spacers. When we get to this part, that's the same method as I just said. And the last round, we hook 2 long stitches inside the first stitch for the extra stitch. Next in the center are long stitches that don't add or subtract. Then just crochet the long stitches one by one. I'm not going to demonstrate what I'm repeating later,